welcome back to Green Squad Chats. We've got an amazing topic today. Today we are talking about having an identity. What do you identify as? Do you have a job? Do you identify as your job? Are you in the military? Are you a CEO? Are you an employee? A lot of us, we identify with what we do and then what it's like and what it means to transition your identity to something completely new and what that process is and how that could affect a person and their growth. So with that said, I'm going to toss it to Brandon to talk about why do people identify? Why do they have an identity? How does this identity even get created?
Yeah, I mean, disclaimer up front is I don't have a PhD in any of this. I'm not an expert, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express on Sunday and Monday when I went to Adam's retirement ceremony. So I think that's what qualifies me, right, Adam?
That's right.
What I think it is just a lifetime of these experiences kind of rack up. And if you've spent a large percentage of your lifetime doing one thing or another, all those experiences kind of accumulate inside of us. And we get immersed in those cultures that we're part of. And when we do that, we just begin to interact with other people in the culture. And it just becomes the way we kind of show up every day. And after so much time doing that, it's easy, I think, for us to just begin associating ourselves and who we are with that culture that we're in and that thing that we're showing up to do every day. I think that's like natural. And unless you're intentional about kind of reflecting that out and considering, just because this is what I do every day, it doesn't mean that's who I am. Unless you're intentional with that, really intentional, it's easy just to get caught up, I think, in your role and identifying as that. And I think in the military, it's really easy to do that. We got a bunch of vets here, active and retired now. So I'm interested to hear some other thoughts.
I have a question because I think this is relatable and maybe the most common, regardless if you're a 20-year military person, a CEO of a company, a director of a company. I think the first conflict as professionals, or one of the first conflict as professionals that we have an identity crisis is probably like when you get married as an early professional. Oftentimes, like, are you the tech director at a company or are you a husband? Those are two really important things. Like, what is your identity? And then you have kids. It's like, because it's two things that are pulling you, but now you're creating multiple identities. I have kids. Now I'm a father. I'm a husband. And then when you transition out of job. So Tom, I see you have something. I'm really curious because you just went through a transition leaving the military where your focus has changed immensely. And like what you do, you have a new identity.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing I think of is, I did about 21 years. And I think you see, when I reflect on my Navy career, my identity was that of a naval aviator. That's who I was. I was also a husband. I was also a father. And first and foremost, I was a naval aviator. And I can say that because, or I feel that way because if there was ever a choice to be made, the Navy came first. And for that reason, I think that was my primary identity. Yes, I was still a father. Yes, I was still a husband. I tried to do my best at both. And when the Navy called and said, hey, you're going to deploy 6 weeks early, I wasn't like, no, I got my kid's baseball tournament. I was like, okay, I'll pack my bag, right? And so I feel like that's the primary, that's the driver. And I think that's one of the reasons so many career military folks leave the service and go into GS jobs or contracting jobs because it aligns with their identity. And whether it's your assumed identity or your natural identity, I don't know. Brandon will have to educate us on that. But yeah, I think redefining yourself and really getting in touch with your identity at a deeper level is hard to do. And through my transition, I used a company, a nonprofit called the Commit Foundation that basically forced me to reflect on a deep level and figure out what my identity was. And I found that extremely helpful because most of the last 20 years, I was not very introspective. So, I think that was a key component of me redefining myself is that introspection. And I challenge anybody who's going through a transition to dedicate time, think deeply, whether it's guided, whether it's with somebody like Brandon, whether it's with a nonprofit like Commit, spend the time. It is worth it. Invest in yourself because this has probably been the hardest year of my life from a, transition perspective.
I'd be interested to know what you walk into a room of strangers and you shake somebody's hand in an introduction and they say, hi, James, I'm Adam. What do you do? What do you tell them?
Hi, Adam. I'm James. If they ask what I do, I tell them I'm a real estate investor, which encompasses a lot of things, mostly focused in the Tampa area. And then they usually have more questions. And then I talk about our different strategy of investing, long-term holds, development, urban infill, mentoring and teaching other people to grow their business with our local group. It's pretty common at some of the meetups that I go to. They're just like, what do you do?
I think that's fascinating too. What would you have said 8 years ago?
I'm an officer in the Navy.
You're probably the best example of us of, I think, somebody who really embraced the next evolution of your growth into all of the great things you've done in the Tampa area as a real estate investor, a mentor, running the retail team. Like you did it looks seamless to me that you were able to take all of the great things you did in the Navy, have this like complete identity that you were fully engrossed in and committed to. And as that started to change for you, you just embraced the next thing. I think that's a challenge for a lot of people. I see this a lot in the investor space in these communities that we're in, where people, they have this purpose, this passion, and they're attracted to, real estate and investing because it's usually a deeper reason. They want to change the legacy of their family. They want to create time freedom. There's usually some deeper why, but there's an inflection point in the middle where you're doing both. You're living both identities. And one of them is almost a secret identity. You go to work all day in your normal job that you've been identifying with, but you're thinking about your side identity and your secret identity. And you're a little nervous about telling people you do that because it's like, well, I don't want to be perceived as not committed to the thing I do. And I really want to do this other thing. And that's where I see most of the conflict happen. Like when people are finally allowing their secret identity to come out. And some of it is imposter syndrome too. It's like, am I ready to tell people I'm a real estate investor or a coach or an educator or whatever my next identity is going to be? I'm not really doing it at a high level yet to my expectation. This is a really fascinating thing to me because I went through this as well.
I appreciate you mentioning that that it looks seamless. It is not seamless at all. So it's interesting because you mentioned, or you had asked me like what I would have responded with, and I used to say I'm an officer in the Navy. And like, what do you do in the Navy? And I used to say sarcastically like I exercise sound leadership and wise judgment. And I guess it is funny to be sarcastic like that, but the reality is I do the same thing. In the real estate investing business, I lead a team by example. I embody the expectations that I set for the culture, and I start with myself on that. And then I problem solve in a manner that I use my judgment to get the best outcome while mitigating risk. So the two aren't that different conceptually, but the title has changed for sure.
Yeah, I think that we're talking about identity here, but a lot of times when somebody asks you what you do, I think a lot of times we also consider who that person is, where they're coming from, what's the context of our life that person's asking us the question. And then we try to pick the part of us that we think is going to connect most with that person. If you ask me what I do right now, I'd tell you, I'd like to think that all the introspection, hard work I've done, like I know my purpose and cause, right? Like I'd like to say, you ask me and I say, I help leaders uncover their best selves so they can do the same for their team, right? But that's in reality, if I met somebody and they ask me what I do, I still have this thing in my head where I'm not going to say that because they're going to be like, what does that mean really? When in fact, maybe I should say that because it's core to who I am.
You should say that.
And if they don't get it, then they'll just ask me more questions to better understand, like, well, what does that actually mean, right? But the inclination is, I'm a professor, military professor at the Naval War College, right? Which is true, which is part of who I am. But if you dig deeper, like, what do I love most about that role? It is I am helping develop leaders so that they can go back and develop their teams. Like I am doing what the initial line that I said, purpose, cause, right? That's what I'm lucky enough to be doing still in the Navy. And so the point of all that, I guess, is just we have in our head, what do we think the other person wants to hear sometimes? And like, I struggle with it too. And I'm super, you guys know, super introspective, lots of deep work about my blueprint, and I help others do the same. Right. But I would still, where's this person coming from, and how can I connect with them in a way they're going to understand?
I notice absent in your statements was naval aviator. I'm a pilot. I fly helicopters for the Navy. Tom identified as a naval aviator. You weren't tied up in that part of your identity anymore. I'm sure at one point you were. And what's interesting is there's even like, based on the culture or the microculture, I mean, some cultures try to get you to not identify with a niche microculture inside of a greater organization. Like, as an example, I'll give you a military example. Military example will be like Marine Special Operations. One of their mantras is special operations is what I do. A Marine is who I am. So they want them to continue to identify as a Marine and not lose that part of the culture. Just saying, special operations is what they do, rather than, oh, I'm a special operator or whatever, because they want to keep the greater culture. We see that a lot. I mean, you could see that in industry too. If you have like a software engineer that works for Apple, they might just say, I'm a software engineer, but Apple would want you to be inculcated into their culture. Oh, I'm a software engineer at Apple. Those are telling statements.
Yeah, I think that an organization there's a vested interest in making sure that the folks that are on the team feel like that's a huge part of who they are, is being on that team and what that team represents. And the Marines do it. In my observations, 21 years in the Navy, the Marines do it better than any other service, in my opinion. And I've worked with joint organizations with other services.
Very cold. They
intentionally do things to make sure that the team feels like, yes, we are part of this greater Marine team. And there are huge benefits to doing that in an organization, 100%. But then when you bring it back to the individual level, then you could see why then as an individual, I feel this strong identity pull. Okay, but that's going to, like, your relationship with the Marines will end, even though you're always a Marine. Eventually you're going to get out of the military. And so I just can't overstress enough the importance of doing the inner work to figure out like what else, like what is really core about you that you're going to take with you no matter where you go.
Yeah, I think that is such an impactful statement. And I like the military example in this instance, because they're probably one of the greatest organizations that really inculcates people into their culture and literally creates a complete identity around that person. The downside to that is how many service members, whether they did 4 years or they did 20 or 30 years, are completely lost when they lose that identity, because it does come to an end and it's abruptly the day you walk out the door, you are irrelevant to the service, irrelevant. And then you completely lose that camaraderie, that all that in touch that you had, and now you're potentially lost. And it's pretty well known we have a fairly high suicide rate post-service, particularly from the 2000s era Marines who were inculcated into did combat deployments and all that stuff. So it's important to know who you are at your core, more so than just, hey, I'm a Marine, hey, I'm a naval aviator, hey, I'm a special operator, or whatever it may be. Whatever unique thing you've done, a title that you've earned, does not define who you are.
I'm always surprised when people find out that I'm a Marine, how many people decide to share, oh, I thought about going into the military, or I thought about, and I marvel at their inclination to identify with that decision, and then how many people don't make that an action step, right? Like, oh, I thought about it, but then my wife or my girlfriend or my parents, and then there's always, and the tonality of the statement is exactly the same for every single person, predominantly men. They're like, yeah, I wanted to go do that, but, and then they trail it off. And you can tell that there's some subconscious, like, man, I really wanted to prove to myself, or really wanted to do these things. And so I find that it's how surprising and uniform that response is when they find out that I'm a Marine, especially a Marine. I'm like, yeah, man, that was it. And then Yeah, well, that's not you now.
Well, it's fascinating because they perceive it to be a hard thing that you accomplished, right? And they're like, just people attract to that. Maybe why some service members don't say what they do, because they don't want to have that conversation. Like, yes, I know. I'm sure you would have, become a Coast Guard person, but you can't swim. I get it. Yes, I know. I was going to be a pilot, guys, but I'm colorblind. I'm sure I would have been great, Maverick style.
I have no doubt about that,
So I
Adam.
do like to identify as a aviator. I just, can't do it.
Honorary. You're an honorary aviator.
We'll do my wing ceremony in November if you guys are down.
I love it.
I'll bring a drone to fly. It's such a deep thing. It's really hard to wrap your mind around. Now that I'm fully transitioned from military to business solely, being a business leader rather than a military leader, I look back in retrospect and I watch people that I get an opportunity to coach in the real estate space, mostly people in their W-2 jobs who want to free their time and create different connections in their life and do something they're just kind of stagnant, and they want to do something they're more passionate about. It's usually surrounded around building wealth, but not so much for the money, because what wealth could potentially provide for you and your family, whether it's time or opportunity or whatever it may be. Why do you think people have secret identities? Like, what is the impetus for being almost fearful of saying, hey, I work at Apple, I'm a software engineer, but I'm like this real estate investor on the side, and I don't really want to talk about it because of what? Like, what is it that keeps people with their secret identities internal, rather than going, hey, I'm actually more passionate about this and I'm going to let the world know, because when I let the world know things, turns out opportunities start to come to me. Why do you think that is?
I think it's a whole host of self-limiting beliefs, Adam. Or it is fear of some sort. For me, here, I'll just make it personal. So I've been a real estate agent for a year and a half, and I didn't really tell anybody I was an agent for like 8 months. And I think there was a self-limiting belief on my part that that's not what I wanted to be known as, because I've got a negative view of the industry, of a lot of elements of the real estate sales industry. And so that's one element. The other element is it almost felt like I was cheating on the other identities that I had. And in the moment, that was that of a Navy pilot. And there was some part of me that felt like I couldn't be both. And I don't think that was accurate in hindsight, but those were my reasons.
You struggle with this, James? Have you struggled with this?
I'm not as much. Not as much. I did for a little bit, but then I kind of realized through creating my own experience that you can overcome that with technical mastery. So if you develop a set of skills and expertise by being fanatical about pursuing that knowledge, then you being compared, or your belief about being compared to the agent who's done it for 25 years is it's irrelevant. And then actually what I started to realize is people that use that as a crutch, they're usually not good. They're usually not good at what they do. If you feel that you have to tell somebody, especially for real estate agents, I don't know why this is a thing. I have my license in Florida, for people listening. I have my license in Florida. I mostly use it for doing our own deals. And I also have a team of other agents that I support and mentor. And so I have found that when an agent with experience, of decades of experience, when they feel the need to have to tell you how long they've been doing the job, they're usually not that good at what they're doing, at carrying out a transaction and solving problems on behalf of their client. And they usually say it from a point of pride. So I think you can overcome all that by just being good at what you do. And the way I've become good at what I do is just be obsessed. So
yeah, ego is one of the worst. It's extremely limiting. I agree with that, James. You can overcome experience with obsessive expertise. You totally can. Obviously, there's some experience is certainly helpful. One of the most powerful things that I think is very underrated for people is literally just telling the world what they do. I'm not, somebody's like, I'm not getting deals. I'm not getting the thing that I'm after. And it's well, did you tell anybody you're doing that? And they're like, well, no, because I'm worried that my boss might see it on the internet, or something like that. And they're holding themselves back because of that self-limiting belief. And I actually had that same self-limiting belief for a long time, just because of like the community I'm in and like operational security and those kind of things. But over time, what I realized was it's just fear. Like it's my internal fear. It has nothing to do with anybody else other than me, and that there was a way I could do it. And what I found was when I told people what I was doing and I became more public with it, way more opportunities came to me. Way more doors opened up for me. And I was like, oh my gosh, what an idiot I was. Like I could have just said that I was doing this other thing. And first off, nobody would have cared. Secondly, most of the bosses I have were actually interested and were like, how can I participate in what you're doing? I was kind of like, oh my gosh, why did I wait probably 2 or 3 years too long to let the world know what I was working on?
I love how Tom put it. You feel like you're cheating on the other roles that you play. Absolutely. But we hit it. Limiting beliefs, assumptions. The fears that we have, these limiting beliefs, they stem from an assumption. For example, I assume that if my boss knows that I have this other side thing going on, then my boss is going to think that I'm not committed to the job that I'm supposed to be doing for my boss. That's an assumption I'm making. And that assumption is leading to a fear of, well, I don't want him to think I'm not committed, which leads to the behavior of, well, I guess I'm just not going to tell anyone.
Which is a fear you completely created in your own mind without any substantiation.
Yeah, it's exactly. Like, how do you know that assumption you're making is true? You don't know it's true until you test it. And then when you finally test it and you find out, oh, I was wrong. That assumption was wrong. And then you're like, well, shoot, I guess I can tell people what I do, right? And so then your behavior can change. And that's actually a skill. Like if you can learn to uncover those root ways that you look at things, those assumptions you're making about how the world works and what people are going to think or not think, et cetera. If you can get to that root and then figure out a way to test it and see if it's really true, that unlocks your ability to actually change your behavior towards whatever goals you have or whatever you're trying to change it towards.
I like having my identities assist with other identities. For example, I've been training jiu-jitsu for almost 20 years, and I like how my identity as a jiu-jitsu practitioner, a jiu-jitsero, helps me be a better father, helps me deal with being a better Marine, helps me keep my, attempts to keep my patience and emotions in check, which allows me to be more clear when things are going wrong, and how I'm able to reflect and connect with my different identities to help me move through issues and problems, good or bad, in my life.
Did you say it's called the Jiu-Jitsero? Jiu-Jitsero?
Yeah, I don't even know if that's a word. We just say it a lot sometimes.
Oh, you made that up. Checks out.
Urban Dictionary.
Yeah, that's like the opposite of the limiting belief. You believe that your different identities actually support each other, which I think for a lot of folks working as a leader in any organization, having this desire to be better in the kind of wealth side of your life, the financial side of your life, does help and impact like our jobs in the military, helps us to mentor the folks that we have an opportunity to lead significantly better, helps them to make better decisions in their personal lives, which is going to make them better practitioners in the service. So if your mindset is that, you're probably very happy to tell people around you what the skills are that you obtained, understanding, knowing, learning real estate. I mean, I bet if we took a poll in here, how many, we all come from the military background, so that's our organization. How many service members have you provided mentorship and guidance to when it comes to wealth building or the financial aspect of their life? I mean, you probably can't even count. It's been so many. I know for me, I talked to a lot of people about that. I'm sure you all do as well.
Yeah. I would link it to what both you and Travis just said. Having other interests and pursuing these other areas for growth and opportunity in the skills that you develop there, absolutely, you can bring those back to whatever your primary day job is. I'm in a deep, intense coaching development program and cohort right now. And every day that I go facilitate leader development courses, I use coaching skills to help my team in there at the time, the class, to help them become more aware of some of these leader development concepts that we're talking about. And I have watched myself become better at that throughout the year that I've been in this coaching development program. It's 100% transferable. All these skills, that's another thing, like all these skills, you don't just apply them to the one job that you have, right? You extract them and apply them to your entire life. Bring them home with you, right? Financial education for your family, for your kids, start to build that legacy. Helping at work, like you said, Adam, counseling and mentorship to folks at work. So highly transferable skills.
Well, I think to kind of tie a bow on this, the truth is, when you have multiple identities and you're scared to mix them up, they're really actually helpful to each other. They're powerful for each other. They can make each side of each one of those identities better. You can serve better, you can lead better, you can operate better. You know, if you're a technical guy and your hobby is being a ham radio operator, something like that, like those are complementary and make you a better person in either one of those two identities. So think about the limiting beliefs that you have. Challenge your assumptions. Why do you believe those things? Ask the questions. Don't be afraid to tell people what you do and what's important to you and how it aligns with your values, because at least what I take from this call today is it has significantly impacted everybody's lives when they finally came out and said, I'm a real estate agent. And then you've been able to serve more people and make better connections and have better relationships. So this has been a great call, guys. If you got something from this call, from this podcast, and you or any of our podcasts, please just take a moment and leave us a 5-star review. We'd be immensely grateful for that. It helps other people to get an opportunity to hear this. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next Green Squad Chats podcast.